the change native plants make. So let's learn how to grow these wonderful plants that we can make, can all be change makers, and have practically no financial investment in that. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about the crucial role that native plants play, I can highly recommend to watch any YouTube recording of one of Doug Tallamy's presentations. His knowledge and vision have inspired many of us. As a matter of fact, even the Butterfly Way movement of the David Suzuki Foundation. Lauren Johnson, a Toronto writer, opened my eyes to planting native plants. I can recommend any of her books as a great foundation to gardening with native plants. You can also find a lot of condensed information and resources on our website, cliffcrestbutterflyway.com. If you like more seeds, you can get them through us. You can also order some at the North American Native Plant Society. There will be a CD Saturday in February, and there's lots of nurseries who send you native plants. I have used native plant nurseries and I like them. So let's talk about why it is great that we all grow native plants from seed. In order to ensure biodiversity, which will make our plants more resilient, especially important in our time of climate change, we need to grow our plants from seed. Every single seed is an individual and has a different genetic makeup. In contrary to this, big nurseries will often grow native plants from cell tissue, which makes every single plant identical. We should also remember that when we grow shrubs from cuttings and not from seed, that we also produce identical clones. So growing plants from seed therefore becomes an important conservation work we all can do. These are species, there are species like the woodland plants that are extremely difficult to grow from seed because their seeds cannot dry out, and they need sometimes even several years to break dormancy. In this project, we are concentrating our efforts on growing plants that are easy to grow from seed. Most of them will even bloom in the first year. Unfortunately, everybody's starting. The butterfly weed will take 2, sometimes 3 years to bloom. So does ironweed, the dense blazing star, and the virgin bower. So let's get started. With this typical picture, I want to show you what great yield you will get. These are New England aster seedlings, about 1 month after sowing them into a recycled plastic container. You can divide them as at this stage, let's say into between 8 to 200 pots. And we'll talk about this later. So how do we do this? And why do we need to plan a native plant garden in winter if we want to grow it from seed? Let me just, I think, do you see this here? Yes, okay. So a lot of native plant seeds need to go through a cold and moist period in order to germinate. We can let seeds stratify naturally outdoors or mimic this through a cold, moist stratification, which I call sometimes maybe CMS in the fridge. So now January is the time to make a decision which method you like to use to grow your plants. Method 1 is the natural and simple way. In order to let the seeds go through the natural cold and wet periods, you need to expose the seeds to the elements. You can start now, and you should be done sowing latest by middle of February. Next year, to avoid the snow, which we have just now, you can already start in November. But anyhow, we are left with now, and it is still a good time to get your seeds outside. If you do not want to work outside in winter, or you don't have a place where you can sow the pots indoors and then take them out, you can use the second method and stratify your seeds in the fridge and then sow them outdoors anytime in spring. Since native seeds don't get damaged by frost, you don't have to worry about the last frost date as with vegetables or annuals. Both methods will yield beautiful seedlings by May or June. And it's also a good idea to experiment with both the methods to see which one you might like better. So let's talk about the first method. So to go with the simple first method of letting the seeds stratify outdoors, you need to sow your seeds more or less right now and be done by mid-February. It is ideal to place them in an area with consistent climate, close to wall, and especially in the shade. They need to get rained and snowed on, and you should protect them against critters with a net. You can even cover them with some leaves for extra protection if you still have some. It is also great to let the stems of all the native plants stand over winter to feed the birds. This picture was taken this morning. You see the dark-eyed juncos here eating black-eyed Susan and anise hyssop seeds, and they loved it. But be aware not to keep your sown pots too close to the standing stems, because they still self-seed all winter long. So otherwise you might end up with a lot of surprise plants, like you can see in this picture. So there is a lot of volunteering goldenrods. This is the most offender usually. And it's just right in between coneflowers and hyssop. So then in spring, you need to move the pots in a sunny location with easy access to water, since once the seedlings have germinated, they must be kept moist and should never dry out. So now the second method. If you don't feel like gardening right now and you won't like to sow your seeds, and then you need to sow your seeds in spring. Then you need to start planning your stratification about 2 to 3 months before that. And so this will bring us to about now. So if we think of starting of mid of April, we need to get starting organized by the middle of January, right? So not all seed species though need to be stratified to sprout in spring. So these ones you could sow directly just in spring. And then in spring, once you have stratified your seeds in the fridge, you would then also see them in a sunny location in pots. And we'll go over all of this. So now how do we stratify the seeds? First, you need to find out which species need to be stratified, and if so, for how long. So New England aster, dense blazing star, the ironweed, white snake root, and purple coneflower, they all need the 60 days to break dormancy. And the problem though is that it can get extremely confusing when you search the internet, because even the experts don't agree on how much stratification is needed whatsoever. For example, between the United States National Resources Conservation Services, native plant nursery owners, and ecological landscape designers, who you would think everybody knows their stuff really well, one will claim that no treatment is necessary, and another advises to stratify for 90 days. So what do we make out of this? I think one might refer to breaking dormancy and the other to having the best germination rate. So a cold, moist treatment will always greatly enhance the germination rate, even in species where no treatment is necessary to break the dormancy. So, but be careful. I noticed that the smaller seeds can start sprouting in the fridge after about 30 days, and then transferring them from the paper towel into the pots becomes difficult. So I recommend to stratify the species we don't really need a treatment, to just stratify them for about a month. So then we have virgin bower, Joe pie weed, blue vervine, foxglove beer tongue, and all the milkweeds. They do need 30 days of cold, moist stratification. And they also need light to germinate, and we'll talk about this later. And then there are the ones which theoretically need no treatment, but which do profit from a 30-day cold moss stratification anyway. And these are the anise hyssop, the black-eyed Susan, the great blue lobelia, the sweet ox-eye, pearly everlasting, and the evening primrose. So once you know how long you need to keep a seed in the fridge, you can organize your seeds. I organize them in envelopes. Once I have chosen the approximate date I like to start, like let's say, for example, 21st of April, then I can calculate backwards and mark this in my calendar. And then I know which seeds need to go into the fridge at what time. So come the time, you moisten a paper towel and wring it out well. And then you have to lay it on a very clean counter. Then you sprinkle your seeds on top and fold it in half or quarter. Then you put it in an airtight bag and label the bag with the name of the plant. If you know the origin, then do that as well, and the date when you put it in the fridge. It is also beneficial to avoid chaff, meaning any other plant debris, with the seeds to minimize the risk of fungus that could develop. I have not really encountered that issue, even though I don't spend a lot of time cleaning the seeds thoroughly. So sometimes you will see some brown circles around the seeds. These are oak acorns. It happens with all the seeds. But that is normal. Just when it becomes fuzzy or blue, then it's fungus. If you see the fungus, you can just throw that part which is affected out. And you can check back on your seeds every 2 weeks or so once they're in the fridge. And if they get a bit too dry, just spritz a little bit of water in the bag and keep the seeds in the fridge until you want to sow them. So let's get into the details of sowing. Let's talk about pots and soil first. Anything with sides, a bottom, and some drainage holes, very important, can be used as a planting container. There are lots of planting containers to recycle in the kitchen that we can get one more use out of. I experimented also with cardboard boxes, as you can see here, and it works really well. Just be aware that you can't move them because the bottom really degrades literally immediately. For our purposes, an expensive seed starter medium is not necessary. Regular potting soil is just perfect. The finer it is, though, the better, and especially for the smaller seeds. In this picture here, you see soil which is not ideal. It was a bit too coarse. And I also want to mention that I will not talk about sowing directly into the soil, because this requires a whole different set of knowledge, which I do not have experience with. I just want to point out that the seeds from us will not be enough to get any results if you were just to sow them onto the soil. You will need a lot more seeds. Like nature disperses thousands of seeds and maybe 1 or 2 will grow. On the other hand, the effort of starting plants indoors under grow lights is not needed for these easy to grow native plants. The methods Cynthia and I provide you with will just yield good results. So let's talk about what we need to consider when we are sowing the seeds. Since the seeds come in all shapes and sizes, they need to get planted in different ways. All seeds should be placed on the soil and gently pressed onto it to make sure they have contact with the soil, which keeps them moist. Then a rule of thumb is to cover a seed with soil about the width of the seed. Some people like to use coarse sand to cover them. I just use the same potting soil to make it easy. It is important to know that some seeds need light to germinate, so you cannot cover them at all. These are mainly the tiny ones like lobelia, beer tongue, and blue vervain, but also the parachute seeds like ironweed, asters, milkweed, or even milkweed, joe pie, snake root, boneset, all those parachute looking seeds. So really all our seeds beside the really thick ones just need to be sown on top of the soil. For the surface sown seeds, you have to be even more diligent in watching out that they don't dry out, especially after they germinated. So on the other hand, watering can dislodge small seeds. So it is often recommended to water the seeds from the bottom. But I have not figured out how to have saucers underneath my pots and not any water in them after rain. So because of letting the seeds stand in water is not good either, I just water them very gently from the top. Now let's talk about the spacing. So native plants like to grow tightly together as seedlings. So you can sow the smaller seeds quite densely. So you can see in the picture here. And if you have bigger seeds, like for example, milkweed or tree seeds, you can place them a little bit apart from each other because they will all sprout and it's not too much work to put them deliberately next to each other. So let's talk about labels. So the wooden popsicle sticks will only work for spring sowing. If you start in winter, you need a sturdier system. Any plastic labels, for example, cut up yogurt containers work well. Cynthia will give you advice on the pens to use. I just used a foolproof method, a little bit overkill, and put a clear tape on top of the writing, and it has worked for me so far. What's really important is to label every single pot because you will move them. No matter what you think, you will move them. As you can see on this picture here, even then, you never really know what's growing in your pots because these, for example, are sweet oxeye volunteers, and it's supposed to be a lupine, which then grew to a beautiful plant the year after. So let's talk about protecting your seeds. Sometimes you get some very unexpected disturbers. This American toad just loves to bury into the loose soil of the seedling pots and easily jumped through most of my protection, including the chicken wire mesh. I could hardly believe it, but it's just doing it. I loved seeing her, even though she destroyed here my blue-eyed grass, which takes 2 years to even sprout. And the usual offenders are the squirrels, mice, and birds. So this cage is a little bit over the top, but it gives me a solution that will last for a while. The white spaces here were not even good enough to protect from squirrels. I learned this the hard way. And so I put just a 1/4-inch mesh on top of it. Chicken wire is usually good. It's just a bit dangerous and spiky to work with. Then what I like is the netting. It's just so simple and it does work. Even if you just lay it over, it's fine. If you're really in a bind, even some clear plastic bags, I sometimes put them overnight, and during the day, the squirrels are not that bad usually to protect. And of course, if you have them in a real proper greenhouse setup, then they are very well protected. So starting in April and certainly by May, your seedlings will start to sprout. And now it is very important to keep them moist. And they will grow. These seedlings have been sown in April and have grown so much till the 15th of June. You can see here that I forgot to label a lot of pots. So this is a bit of a guesswork. You get really good in identifying seedlings without a label at one point, but you know better now. And now you also see that it starts to overcrowd. So we need to start uppotting. So uppotting will give the seedlings more space to grow. Once the seedlings have reached a certain size and start crowding each other out, it is time to divide them and give them more space to grow. And this blue lobelia is ready to be divided in several clumps. Once it's planted in fresh potting soil, in bigger containers, it will grow very quickly and it will still bloom in the same year. This is also your first opportunity to start sharing your bounty with people who like gardening. Just give them clumps, which they can further divide themselves, and then you have less work. I divided this Job highweed in July. I could have done this much earlier because it came easily apart and they are bigger plants. I just planted 1 or 2 in a pot. And all those spindly looking plants recovered, but it's very important that you put them in the shade and give them a break and keep them really well watered for that week. And the seedlings will grow rapidly. Once they have more space. You can see that here too, and fresh soil. See those beer tongue seedlings, foxglove beer tongue seedlings? I have only had time to take them apart in August, and by October they were this big. So a good rule is if they are about 2 inches, they're ready to be planted out in the soil. And this is also a good time to think of your friends and neighbors who are not such experienced gardeners, and you can give them really nice plants at that time. So this picture shows you also a good size when you can plant them out into the soil, and then the real development happens. The plants were planted in July, and those tiny plants, believe it or not, filled out the space, and most of them even bloomed within the same summer. And here they are. This is September in full bloom. Generally speaking, summer is not the most ideal time to plant out because it's usually drier and new plantings require more water to establish their roots. If you're able to water, the seedlings will start thriving and grow much more rapidly in the real soil than in containers. For projects where watering is a challenge, fall is a much more ideal time to plant them out, and you can plant till frost. So for great success, match your plants to the conditions they like. Learning about different natural habitats like the prairies, woodlands, or swamps can give you a good understanding on what conditions your plants will thrive. You can check out our website for that. This is a picture from the website, actually all of them. And all the information I gave you today, you can also find it on the website under the tab Growing Perennials from Seed. And if you're interested in learning more what the individual plants do for the ecology and how tall they get and all those kind of things, we have this on the website as well. And it is under the tab Easy to Grow Native Plants from Seed. So now, thank you so much for joining us today. With this last picture, I want to demonstrate that even the smallest seedling of the very beneficial native plants are already fully tied into the ecosystem. This 1.5-month-old butterfly weed already feeds lots of monarch caterpillars, even though it doesn't excite us with its spectacular blooms yet, but doesn't matter. And the eastern redbud sapling has already served leaf cutter bees. You see those round cutouts. They cut out those perfectly shaped circles to separate each egg in their nests. If you're inspired to grow more native plants, you can order seeds by emailing us to cliffcraftsbutterflyway@gmail.com or go through the website. Now, again, housekeeping, if you have questions, please enter your name in the chat. We might not see you raising the hand or so, just put your name in the chat And then we will ask you that question after Cynthia's presentation. And you could also write the question just in the chat if you like. So now I'll pass it over to Cynthia, who will share her experience with a very interesting way of winter sowing.
Okay, give me a moment to find my presentation. Here, this is not the right one. I want this one. There we go. Okay, so I learned about this technique called winter sowing, and I thought I'm going to try this because I've got these 2 teenage boys and I'm constantly having to cook for them, and there is no room in my refrigerator to stratify seeds. I just can't do it. So, you know, I describe myself as a weekend warrior gardening. I thrive for the gardening. I just feel like I feel so much better if I can get into the garden. And so I've winter sowed. I just have 1 year of experience doing this, and it was really amazing. Okay, so this is my yard. Okay, so I'm sort of new to native plant gardening. My garden had a lot of goldenrod because that's what grew easily, and a lot of common milkweed. But so my goals over the years has been to reduce the lawn because I don't really want to cut the grass. And I wanted to convert the non-natives to natives. So I've got this ribbon grass up front. The bunnies really like to hide in there, but it doesn't provide much ecological benefit really, other than a hiding spot for those animals. So I wanted to increase my native species, so to provide more continuous bloom and more visual appeal. I am on a main street, so I want to be able to encourage more people to grow native plants. So to do that, I think having a very aesthetically pleasing lawn helps. And maybe this garden doesn't appeal to a lot of people, but the insects like it. And I also would this year, hopefully I'll incorporate more native grasses amongst the native plants. And again, I'm a highly visible location, being on a main street, so trying to improve the visual appeal of my yard is kind of important, and to help encourage people. So there's such great resources and so many good books, and especially wintertime is such a good time to read. And so some of my favorite books is this Garden Revolution by Larry Weiner. That's a fabulous, fabulous book. I highly recommend it. The work of Piet Haldorf, he's a Dutchman, landscape designer, beautiful, beautiful work. And he's inspired entire genres of landscape architects. And so, you know, one day, hopefully my garden would look like that. I highly doubt I'll be able to do it as well as he will for sure. But he's amazing. And so he's quite inspiring, and shows how beautiful a large piece of land can be with native plants and without grass. Roy Diblock's good book, No Maintenance, is a fabulous book. I highly recommend that. And that talks about how to grow plants and to reduce the workload of gardening. So that's really good. And again, this Planting in a Post-Wild World, also a great book. So there's so many good books. And Braiding Sweetgrass, still working through that. It's just such a beautiful way of thinking about the landscape from Robin Wall Kimmerer. So there's such great books and resources. I highly recommend digging in when you can. But in order to achieve that sort of really beautiful look, growing from seed really is the most cost-effective way to achieving many, many plants, right? You go to if you go to Home Depot or someplace like that, those nurseries, like those plants are not ecologically diverse, and sometimes they use like pesticides to grow those. So by growing them from seed, you've got diverse plants and you get lots for cost effectively. And so you can cold moist stratify in the refrigerator. This is a method that doesn't really work so well for me, but works well for other people. And it's totally a method that you can use. Or you can sow seeds outdoors as nature does. And so you could either direct sow in the fall or the spring, or you can do what I did last year, called a technique called winter sowing, which is sowing them in containers and leaving them out in the winter to stratify. So first of all, like, why not just direct sow? Well, one of the main reasons is that when these plants grow up, you don't really know what they are. So you can rely on iNaturalist to photograph those plants. But sometimes I didn't have luck trying to figure out what some of these plants were until they were blooming. And then I'd find out, oh, there's a weed. I spent so many months growing this weed, or, you know, it's, it takes a lot of time, and there's uncertainty as to what is really growing. And a lot of times it's the weeds that grow in new soil. So what is winter sowing? So winter sowing is a propagation method used throughout the winter where temperate climate seeds are sown into protective vented containers or not, and placed outdoors to foster a naturally timed high percentage germination rate of climate tolerant seedlings. And simplified is just putting your seeds in plastic containers or to create a mini greenhouse, or any other pots of any kind, and set them out anytime after Christmas. And then the theory is that the seeds will sprout at the right time and they'll germinate only after completing their necessary cycles of freezing and thawing. So the benefits of winter sowing is space and time and energy saving. So again, I didn't have room in my fridge to sow seeds. And then the other advantage is you don't really need any growing equipment or lights to grow plants indoors. Um, and it also staggers the growing season. So in the middle of winter, I feel like I'm still gardening, even though it's freezing cold outside. There's no hardening off of seedlings. The seedlings are acclimatized. They do develop a nice, strong root system, and they get an early head start. And it's economical, it's low tech, and it's pretty worry free. So when I was first trying to learn how to winter sow, there is this website called Winter Sown, or this Facebook group. And there's also lots of groups on Reddit if you search for winter sowing. And this is a most popularized method using these milk jugs, but we don't get these in Ontario, but throughout the US, everybody like loves these milk jugs. And so they put holes in the bottom, and then they put their potting soil in, sow their seeds, and then tape it all up. And then there's a hole at the top from the natural hole from the milk jug. But for us, these are some other methods that are available. You can recognize the mushroom containers and just stick it in a Ziploc bag. This person used Ziploc bags. I thought that's quite interesting. And then there's all different kinds of food containers or salad containers. And this woman, Trudy Davidoff, she's the one who started this winter sowing. She's the one who's sort of known for starting this movement. Also suggests, you put your pots on a table if you're not able to bend it, and then just cover it with plastic. So there's lots of different ways to do this. This is a Swedish woman, and she's got this great YouTube channel, and I liked the way she did them, where she had these little containers. She's put them inside like a Rubbermaid bin or a tote, and then she took that tote outside and would just lift the lid off when she had too much condensation. So that is another method. So there's lots of different ways of doing this. Basic principles is ideally a translucent container. You want seed above and below so the seeds can grow. And you want condensation holes and drainage holes. So you've got to put holes in the bottom and holes throughout the container to let the moisture out. And then place the pot outside in a safe spot, so where kids or children and animals, where they don't get blown over by the wind also. And then in the spring, you've got to check the moisture levels and to make sure they're not too wet or not too dry. And in the summer, when the sun comes out, you want to watch that the seedlings don't toast inside these containers. So this was certainly not that most fun part of winter sowing, because we don't have those milk jugs. Collecting all sorts of different kinds of containers. And I did have friends give me containers. I work in a hospital. And then COVID hit. So we got all these Virox containers. So I used some of those. A friend of mine gave me these kitty litter bins. They were fabulous. And probably my favorite, like all of these worked, but probably my favorite were these kitty litter bins and this, like the vinegar containers. Those were great. The rest were, they all worked, but they were just more work. You got to make sure you prep your containers. That was, I worked bit by bit, so it didn't have 150 containers all at once. That would have been really nauseating, but like a container at a time is a pretty easy task. Cut these open, use a knife, poke some holes, just a V-slit. The kitty litter bins is tougher plastic, so I did use a drill for those. And then in terms of potting soil, there's lots of discussion about what to use, and organic or not organic, and make it out of coconut coir and make your own concoctions. And there's lots of different things to use. I just used Miracle Glow. That's what I could get from Home Depot last year. That everything else was frozen and buried under snow when I bought my potting soil. There were a little bit of chunks of wood in that potting mix, so it wasn't as fine as I'd like, but it worked. It totally worked fine. I think the key thing is you want to avoid these are more fancy potting soils, but they're the ones with moisture control or water retentive. You want to avoid those. And then in terms of planting depth, Dorte described that really well. So, some seeds need to be sown on the surface and some need to be planted deeper down. I found that I would go often to Wildflower Farm or Prairie Moon Nursery, and I would just look at what they had recommended, and those were two different places of where I would get some information. And what was handy about the Prairie Moon was that they had a picture of every single seed. So when I was cleaning my plants, what is the seed, what is not seed? That was very useful to take a look at their website. So a simple Google search. And then I found that what I needed to do is put all this information on a spreadsheet, because I was resowing plants all the time and couldn't remember like the details. So having a spreadsheet is kind of handy. And then these are some examples of some of the pots that I had sown. I was working in my spare bathroom. There was no way that I would have been able to do this type of thing if I was outside. Like, it's just too cold. So you've got to be able to have a space indoors that you don't mind getting a little bit messy, because the potting soil makes a mess. But if you've got a spare room to work in, where you don't freeze, then this is a doable method. And here's the seeds sown on the surface, and then I would tape these containers down closed. And this one, I actually put snow inside of here. I saw some people had done that. And I thought, I'm going to try that. So I did put snow in a bunch of these things. I carried snow into my house and filled these buckets with snow. My husband thinks I'm crazy. And you think that you won't forget, right? You're never going to forget, but absolutely, you do forget. You forget. So label, label, label. And I tried different things. And because I was winter sowing and these things were going to be sitting outside all winter in the snow, and I tried China marker, I tried pen, pencil, and I found that they all faded. And then with the moisture, they disappeared. And so I did get these garden markers, these permanent garden markers, and they were fabulous, and they lasted. I got those sort of later in the year. So this year will be my really first year trying the garden marker. But when I did finally get them, they lasted for the rest of the year. So they were very useful. And one of the women in our group, she got these acrylic markers from Walmart for $19.99. So that's another option. And definitely you really want to label, like, especially if you're going to do individual pots, you want to label all those pots, because they all get moved around. So you may think, oh, these 12 are that plant and these 12 are that plant. But then the way things work, you end up moving them all around all over the place. And then they all get separated, and then you don't know what's what. So it is handy to label all of them. And even I labeled outside and inside the containers. But again, like the China marker, I really thought people swore by that, and it really didn't work for me at all. So in terms of when to sow, again, you could look at our website. Dorothy's got all that information, and she explained that really well. But I also, the Wildflower Farm and Prairie Moon, those are two good places to look to. And so you've got to look at, what are you going to stratify first? The plants that take the longest, that need the 60 or 90 days, do those ones first, and then sow the seeds that require just a month later on. And I winter sowed until March. Again, trying in January. Now this year I haven't even started yet. So hopefully tomorrow I can start winter sowing some of my plants, and hopefully I can get a good go, but it's been a busy time. So this is an example of some of my early pots, first putting them out. And again, I did put all these snow in these bins. And next year I won't do that. Or this year, I'm not going to do that. I'm not really going to put the snow in there. And this is a seed tray that we got. That was good to try that too. And again, these different containers. And I had this bin, so I threw them in containers so that they wouldn't roll around and blow around in the wind. So where to place the containers, ideally someplace where they can get morning sun. And then when the spring comes, you really want to avoid the hot sun. So don't put it someplace where it's going to be baking in the sun, unless you're able to watch them and move them around as need to, or water them as you need to. You don't want to keep them from drying out. And you want to also check that they don't get too much condensation. It's amazing how much condensation gets inside these pots. And when to open them, when the temperatures are around 10 to 15 degrees consistency. So I kind of like was a mother hen over my pots, and I would take the lid off and then put it back on and take it off, and what should I do? And I did all different kinds of things, but in the end, it all worked out fine, whether I did that or not. So like winter sowing was super successful. Like I got so many plants. Um, I got so many that I didn't even have time to unpot them all. Like this is just like overgrowing out of control. This is a juice container. I put it sideways so I could maximize how many seeds I could get in there. And this is just like out of control, overgrowing. It was fabulous. It was amazing how much I got. And I had tried sowing seeds in my yard a few years ago, and they didn't really come up, or they would come up like 2 years later, and I would have forgotten by them, and certainly been digging around, I would have destroyed anything that had grown. So definitely growing them in the pots was really useful. And the other thing too, what's interesting is because they're in like these protected containers, you don't get a lot of volunteers of other things showing up. So that's one of the benefits of these. Some of the challenges, well, I did have, and I think that's not just with winter sowing, but with growing any plants outdoors, is pill bugs and slugs. And so, and I found that a lot of the plants that failed, I would find these pill bugs and the slugs inside. So, is it their fault? Did they eat my plants, or was it because the soil was too moist and the plants roots were dying and that attracted them? I don't know. I don't want to blame these little guys, but pill bugs are actually really important. They're soil recyclers, so they're really beneficial. And did they eat the roots, or they're actually attracted to things that are dead? So maybe my plants are already dead in the pot. And then in terms of how to get rid of these or how to manage them, you can always just do a Google search, how to get rid of, and then search pill bugs or slugs or whatever and see what it says. Garlic. I think maybe my plants were just too wet. And then in the fall, I found I didn't really have that big of a problem of squirrels, although I'd spoken to Dorte and had heard all of the stories that she was having. And then sure enough, in the spring, some of my plants that I had transplanted, those little darn guys were pulling them out, which was super annoying. So I think the key thing is just really tamp down the soil, so that they can't tell that somebody was digging around in there. Oh, and then this is a little video. I'm probably talking in it, but this is a video that I was showing my sister of like my little native plant nursery and all the different plants that I had achieved through winter sowing. So these are some of the plants that are separated. Here's my switchgrass growing out of a vinegar container, and look how big it grew. Yeah. So my little video. Let's go to the next one. How do I get out of here? Sorry, it's going to autoplay. There we go. Okay, so this is Sherry's garden. So she started off with a garden half the size, and she winter sowed, and she doubled her garden. She had so many plants also, and so she doubled her garden, and she got blooms the very first year. And you can see her garden the year before, I guess that's early in the year, or maybe the year before. And then this is what it looked like in the fall. So, and she got blooms the first year, and it was pretty incredible. So, winter, so you can winter sow in containers, or this is the seed tray that we got from David Suzuki Way. And you can see that the stuff that I had grown and that I had winter sown in little protective greenhouse containers, they did get bigger. And they were taller and more successful than this tray. And I think there were some in rows that I got no seeds coming out of, so maybe they didn't have some good seeds. I think the Blazing Star, I got 0 Blazing Star. So these were just a lot smaller, but I think in the end they did catch up. I did find a thing like this, like separating seeds. I really found that to be a not very fun task. So the advantage of a seed tray is that there you've got individual compartments, so it was easy to pull those little plugs out, and that was kind of nice. But I did find that with the smaller cells that they dry out a little bit sooner, so you have to be on top of that. Whereas plants that I had in a big, like in the kitty litter bin or the bigger containers, I could kind of leave them for quite some time without paying any attention to them, and they kept growing and growing, and they didn't need as much babysitting from me until I could kind of get to separating them. Probably the biggest challenge of winter sowing was how many plants you're going to get. What you're going to do with all of them. So my strategy for this year, what am I going to do after 1 year of winter sowing? I still have these cat litter bins, so I'm definitely going to use those. But we also got through, Dorte was able to acquire all of these little seed trays. So I'm going to do some seed trays. I also have a ton of pots, and I'm going to do a combination of pots. And I think if I want to simulate the greenhouse effect, then maybe come spring, I will cover them up with plastic. Maybe put some holes in it and just to see if that helps them grow a little bit faster. But separating all of those things in bigger containers, I just didn't have a lot of time for that. So I'm thinking that this will be a bit easier. And again, we have all of those trays, which we're hoping that people here are interested in growing native seeds. If you want some trays, reach out to Dorte. Those are really for local crest people or whoever can come pick them up, because we can't really mail those, but we can mail seeds. So you supply, it's like a do-it-yourself kit. You supply your own potting soil and your labels, and we can help you with seeds and with the seed trays. So in summary, winter sowing was highly successful. I got a high percentage germination rate of these seeds, more than I had ever imagined. And the hardest part was keeping the young seedlings properly watered. I kind of probably overdid it some days, and then separating seedlings, and then also what to do with all of the gazillion plants. But luckily, we put together the ambassador program, and we were able to share a lot of our plants that way. And we hope that many of you are also interested in helping with that. So, and again, these are some of our projects. Oh, we can go into discussion now. But one of the things we mentioned the tree giveaway program, but last year we had offered a talk where we had a speaker come and speak. Let us know if you find that interesting, if you would like us to organize some guest speakers. It's actually kind of fun to do. And we can open it up to discussion.
And then, so Elena says here, will we be doing a seed collection training as well, so individuals know how to expand their seed bank and continue in future years?
Yeah, we could absolutely do that. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak too. I think maybe you're all welcome to unmute yourself too. Yeah, the seed collecting has to really happen after your plants have bloomed, and then they start to dry out, and that's when you start to collect them. So my strategy is I actually had a bunch of manila envelopes that my husband was going to throw away, but they were brand new. So I used those, and I would run around all my plants and cut the flower heads off and let the seeds fall into there. So that's one way that I've done it.
I also think maybe Facebook would be a great tool to give information on seed collecting right at the right time, because for example, Columbine, I almost missed collecting any of it. I have very little, just because in May you're not really thinking of collecting seeds yet, and they come just so early, right? So maybe through Facebook, all of us can just share whatever we collect, can put the picture up of the dried up seed head and the seeds. That would be ideal to be on top of seed collection. And maybe we can make a webinar on this as well. This would be then maybe in summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question here is if we have any special recommendations for rooftop or patio gardens, which may be more frequent in some urban environments.
So the rooftop is a very specific habitat. It's can't really get rained on, right? And there's very little soil. So all the alvar plants are used for something like this. So for example, sedums, most of the ones which are used. And I've never looked into that, and I'm not a specialist about this at all, but that is definitely something to look into. Just look up alvar, as well as maybe rooftop gardening with native plants. Then maybe we can find out more about this. So I don't know, has anybody done it in the group? Does anybody have a rooftop with the native plants? You can just speak up, because we don't see everybody.
Yeah, so we actually have a rooftop pollinator garden that we had just this past summer. It was a little bit tricky to keep it irrigated sufficiently. We had some difficulties just because of the logistics of getting water up there regularly when it's so hot and there's just not that much soil. It went pretty good overall, but I was just wondering if there was any other particular tips, but it sounds like it might be something that we kind of learn as we go.
Yeah. And I bet you maybe there's even a Facebook group for something like this, where there are people who've done it, right? Because it's hard to say anything about it if you haven't done it. And you know what, even this year was so wet. So it's not always as wet as this year, right? It was only the summer had a dry spell, but other than that, it was really, really unusually wet. So they need to get established.
Maybe like I haven't done any balcony gardening at all, so I'm just sort of thinking aloud. But you know, there's the like pop bottle upside down where you cut the hole out and stick it in there, and you know, I don't know if that is a good strategy or not, but I do have 2 planters on the front of my front porch, and those planters face west, so they get a lot of sun, and my plants are always dead. But I did find a sedum volunteer into one of mine, and I thought, oh, well, that's pretty handy. It just sort of found its own way there, because I did not plant that sedum, and it did really well. So sedum did work well.
Good to know. Thank you.
Okay, so just moving on to the next question here. Sonia asks, are these methods to be used for annuals and perennials? So I guess for both annuals and perennials.
A lot of the winter sowers that like I follow on Facebook in these Reddit groups, like most of them are not native plant growers. They're all different kinds of plants. They do vegetables, they do all sorts of things. It's pretty interesting. And I think if they're annuals, you don't need to start it now. You could start it like in March, and it does give a head start. So I did grow cosmos in a container, which and the ones that I winter sowed, definitely, like they bloomed. They were so large compared to what I had direct sown. So it's really to give you a head start with your garden. Yeah, it really works. And you know, fairly easy to do, like before you can really get out into your own garden. If you just put a bunch of pots together and, you know, cover them up, put them in a container and put them out there and get a head start, it by the time you can get out in May, you've got plants already to put in the ground.
And for sure, the other 2 methods, to leave them outside now, or that wouldn't work. You do have to go with the last frost date for the annuals, and for the more exotic plants, because the seeds will just get killed with the frost, right?
Yeah, especially if they're not meant to be, you know, if they're not meant for winter, right?
But winter sowing does work. That's where it comes most in handy. It's literally like a greenhouse, and greenhouse tomatoes are grown now, you know. So the winter sowing works perfectly for those.
So I did winter sowing for vegetables, perennials, like the native perennials and annuals. And all the annuals and vegetables were done in March. So I around March break, I put them out and had plants as big or bigger than I ever would have had if I had a direct sowed.
Sherry, when did you start them? Do you remember?
March break, around the March break, middle of March, and this is using the winter sowing method. So I did parsley, basil, tomatoes. I probably 75 tomato plants. I had so many tomato plants I couldn't even give them all away. And along with all my native plants, right? And then the cosmos were magnificent, like 5, 6 feet tall. And those are annuals. I did petunias. I did, a couple of other annuals I tried in flower annuals. But yeah, if you're gonna do annuals of any kind, vegetable or plant or flowers, I would make March break around your time frame for winter sowing.
Okay, so just the next question here is from Radhika. She's asking, she says that she already planted some seeds directly in the ground back in November. And she's asking if there's anything that she can do to improve the chance of them thriving.
My only recommendation is to make sure you know exactly where they are, and then so that in the spring when you're working in your garden that you don't rake them up.
I think the other thing is now it's covered with snow, so it's safe. But maybe when they get uncovered again, maybe put a net or something over it that then at least, and the net should be a little bit off the ground, because if the net is right on the ground, the birds can still pick the seeds, right? That's the biggest problem with the direct sowing, that a lot of the seeds will just get eaten, which is not a bad thing after all, but not what we intend, right?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so the next question is from Alana here about seed collection. She's asking, would cycling seeds back into the local ecosystem be something that we recommend, or something that we could take advantage of to help restore natural areas, local areas? And then related to that, what types of considerations should be taken when reintroducing native plants that we have grown back into the environments, for example, local laws, possible pollution, competition, etc.
Okay, so what I know about this is that for sure, if you take the seeds from that same area where you want to plant it back in, then you have definitely seeds and plants that are adapted to those conditions and that belong there. And still, every single seed, as we learned, is an individual. So you still do something really good for the biodiversity in this patch. I think often in those areas, at least here in Toronto, we have the problem that we have a lot of invasive plants invading the natural areas. And then if the seeds come from the same lot, and if you don't collect too many, so if you collect wild seeds, the rule is that you can't take more than 10%. And an indigenous rule is never take the first and never take the last. So always take from the middle, because the first and the last, they will still, be able to enhance the natural way of producing more and a bigger area of the same plants. So if you do this and if you grow them, you do definitely something really amazing for the area. And then I don't know where you are. Are you in the Rouge, or because in Toronto, theoretically, you're not allowed to do anything on public land if you're not part of this Nature Steward program now. It's brand new. And before you weren't allowed to do anything. But so you need to maybe be part of a group and find out what the regulations are in order to work on public land.
Okay, so The next question is from Laura. She's asking if the Chinese food containers, so the black plastic on bottom with the clear lid, if those are a good option for winter sowing outside, if the holes are made in the bottom and top, or would they be too shallow for roots? Is it better to use taller containers which can hold deeper soil?
Right, there's the ones that there was a container that I got faux in, and it was fairly tall, but it didn't have a lot of space above. It might be a good place to start. What was your experience, Sherry?
Sorry, I was gonna add, just add to that. I did use those containers last season for winter sowing. Where I had success was using them for annuals, because it's a much shorter period that they're in the container. There isn't enough height. So with the native plants and the perennials, they start rooting and growing much earlier, right? Because we're planting them much earlier. And so I didn't find that the perennials worked well in those containers, but the annuals were fine. So the annuals, by the time you're ready to take the lids off because the weather's good enough in May, are just the right height, where the perennials are too tall. It is a good use, though, reuse of those containers. Better than the landfill.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe, well, I guess they're, those ones from sometimes they're too short, so less than 2 inches, a little bit short. And another thing you could do is you could put them in a plastic bag maybe to get height, but I think it's just not enough space down below. Some recommendation is to have at least 3 inches of space, 3 inches of soil for the roots to grow.
Okay, so the next question here is from Catherine. She says she did her winter sowing in late fall. She's asking if that's too early. Also, she covered them with newspapers and thinks some animals have pulled it off. She says, I guess they got eaten. Should I start over?
It's hard to know. Most of what I read about when to winter sow, they said winter solstice is so kind of like Christmas time, but we know that in nature the seeds are flying around way earlier than that. You could just see what happens. I don't know.
I think maybe this is more a direct sow method than a winter sow. So winter sowing, you're actually creating like a greenhouse effect with the plastic. Whether you put it in a container or you put a plastic clutch over top of a pot, you're right, you're creating it. So if you've I'm not sure what type of container you put your seeds in, but if you just covered it with newspaper, then that would just be more a direct sow method, right?
So what I would suggest is just take the newspaper off. It's gone most likely anyway. If you have some more of the same seeds, no harm in just putting some extra in. And then because you've done all the work already, you got the pot, you got the soil, you got everything ready. And then just to make sure you get a net from somewhere. You have to cover them with nets. Otherwise, you will lose a lot of seeds to anybody, right? To birds, squirrels, mice. And then you can save it. Half the work is definitely savable for sure.
One of the handy things about the winter sowing in the container is also too they also say, with climate change, in the spring when it rains and the rain comes down and it pelts really hard, if you've got just pots, it could make the seeds in the sand or the soil jump out of the pot, right? The high pressure. I don't know if that's a big issue. There was times when I had my pots and I kind of had opened them up already, and then there was a big rain going to come. So I quickly went out to my yard and I threw plastic over them, and I just sort of kept it kind of covered for that night. So that's something to think about, or that's something that I had done last year. But when they're in the container, they're kind of a bit more protected from the elements.
Okay. So the next question's from Alana about the container, the sewing container. So we covered that. So just skipping ahead to the next one. Leslie is asking if we can just talk about the tree giveaway.
Yeah, we can. So this will be happening in at the end of April. We need to confirm the exact date, but it will be at the Scarborough Food Security on St. Clair Avenue East and just west of Midland. They have their nice pollinator garden there and their warehouse. So it will be in this space. And so you can go on the website, and I've already made the page, and then it actually, we wanted to do it in fall, and it didn't happen because we wanted to do it on a school ground, and then COVID was just not allowing that. And so I've made the whole website with the trees, which are most likely available. They have the same kind of trees every year. And so you can look it up there. They could maybe change the tree selection a little bit, but the trees will be small, which is better because smaller trees have just develop much better than taller trees. And so you can get 2 trees. Okay.
All right. So the next few questions, I guess the few questions here are just about the containers. So Sheila just asked about the roast chicken containers from supermarkets, Costco. I think we covered that though with about the heights. So I guess we can just skip ahead on that. And then Radhika said, just there's a link here if anyone wants to recycle those black plastic containers. So that's great. Thanks, Radhika.
Yeah, like this year, I'm going to use those cat litter bins, and then I've got pots, and I've got a variety of different containers. And so what I think I'm going to do is the cat litter bins will create that little greenhouse for those plants that are in there. And I think what I'll do is I'll put the cat litter bins around all the little pots, and then when the spring comes, I'll just cover them all up with plastic. That's sort of what I'm thinking to do. Let's see if it works.
Okay.
So that,
oh, sorry.
yeah, so sorry. So that those little containers that you have, you can still use them, but they'll just work as pots and then not so much of a cover.
Okay. So Radayan has a question. What type of flowering native plants grow well in shaded areas?
You know, this will be too much for our webinar just now, because there's many. There is a lot on the website as well. From the ones we offer, there is definitely the white snakewood is amazing for the shade. And other than that, I think we concentrated more on the ones who do well in, because the hyssop is good in part shade. And what else do we have?
Zigzag goldenrod. So I collected a fair bit of zigzag goldenrod, so that does well in the shade.
Yeah, that's great for shade. And then the great blue lobelia is good for part shade. Even the evening primrose could do.
What about the columbine? Do we have lots of columbine seed?
We have none.
Okay.
But they would be good for shade. Yeah.
All right. So I guess this is just a comment here from Sonia that we've been told for years to start our seeds indoors with heat. This is so different from what she's done for years. So, yeah.
Yeah, I had a seed tray that my husband gave me, and it had it was a heated thing, right? You plug it in, and I tried to grow stuff, and anyhow, I didn't have a great luck growing them in that little with the heat thing, and those were with like cosmos and different kinds of grasses, like they weren't native plants that I was trying to grow. So I think it depends on the type of plant that you're trying to grow, but native plants really need that cold moist stratification and that freeze thaw.
I wrote it into the chat as well. I just had an idea that if we collect our seeds, we could create a collective seed bank and put it back into the ecosystem. Maybe giving it to local restoration initiatives in the Rouge and surrounding area. and kind of boosting the biodiversity that way.
Absolutely. This is a great idea. And that's what we're doing. Like I'm, for example, because once you have those plants in your garden, they produce a lot of seeds. And you must have noticed that too. I didn't realize how many would like seeds. Otherwise, I would have collected more. Now they are more or less gone, right? And with the snowfall, even more. But I think this is what we need to do. We need to maybe also collect a little bit from the wild, grow it, and make sure we remember the origin. So we need to really be diligent with also knowing where it comes from, and then bringing it back in the wild for sure. Absolutely. And there's lots of efforts now, so there will be a lot. And I know because seeds collecting is also a lot of effort. So we do have worldwide, we have a shortage of native seeds in comparison to the demand. So it's definitely a really good idea to do so. So I think we can close it off. I hope you enjoyed our different experiences, how we did the sowing. I hope you're inspired to try it yourself, because it's really, really easy. Plants want to live. They will do whatever they can to help you out in being successful. And as we said, if you want to order more seeds, please do so. And thank you so much for staying with us and having so many interesting questions.